Hi, it's Pam, and what I'm showing you today is how to finish off the buttonholes on your Jerry sweater. What you're looking at here is the front right piece of my Jerry sweater. Your buttonholes may be on the front left piece if that's where you decided to place them. The process is the same regardless of where you placed your buttonholes. So what you see is our buttonhole band, a vertical column of slipped stitches that makes a fold line, and the buttonhole band facing. So when we turn at the fold line, we get a nice double layer of fabric for our buttonhole band and then all the way up across our shawl collar. And you'll see that then the buttonholes, or the stitches that you set aside for the buttonholes, line up, and we have a single hole that goes through both layers of fabric. So our job now is to secure the perimeter of this buttonhole, and we'll do that joining each stitch on the buttonhole band with the corresponding stitch on the buttonhole facing. And to do that, we'll use a variation on a 3-needle bind off so that the final edge of our buttonhole is just a single row of bound off stitches that joins the front fabric to the back fabric. Our tool for doing that is a crochet hook, and I'm using a crochet hook that's slightly smaller than the needle I used for the body of the sweater. I used a 5mm needle for the bottom of the sweater, and for the body of the sweater rather, and I'm using this is a 3.75mm needle for the crochet. The idea is to get a bound off edge that is snug and secure, but not so tight that it causes the stitches around it to pucker in. Okay. My working yarn is slightly lighter in weight than the yarn that I used for the body of the sweater. So I knit this sweater with an Aran weight yarn, and my working yarn here is a DK weight. You could use a sport weight, you could probably use a worsted. The idea, again, is just to make it a little bit more snug, tight, and secure in tension than the body of the sweater to give us some nice sturdy buttonholes that can stand up to wear and use. And of course, I'm using a contrast color so that you can see the stitches that I make. You're probably going to choose a yarn that blends in with the body of your sweater instead. Okay, so you can see that I've made a slip knot on with my working yarn. I'm not going to use that slip knot yet. I'm going to set it aside and start with my crochet hook. So the instructions ask you to fold at the fold line, which we've done, and you can see that I've already unpicked the 3 stitches held with waste yarn. So I removed the waste yarn, which was right here, and it released 2 stitches at the top plus the legs of adjacent stitches, which adds up to 4. So I had 2 live stitches, and then I stuck the needle through the legs of the adjacent stitches on each side, giving me 4 stitches on the top needle. The bottom needle, when I unpicked the waste yarn, released 3 stitches, and I picked up a 4th by taking the rightmost leg of the next adjacent stitch, twisting it once, and popping it on that needle like a backwards loop. Okay, I'll do that again. So you've got the rightmost leg of the next adjacent stitch here. I'm going to twist it once, put it on the needle like a backward loop. So then what you have is 4 stitches on top and 4 stitches on bottom, in both the buttonhole band and the facing. So these 8 stitches will be joined with the corresponding 8 stitches on the back. So we start with the bottom needle, the first stitch on the buttonhole band, and we'll join it to the corresponding stitch on the bottom needle of the facing, so the outermost stitches, the 2 outermost stitches on the bottom needles. I'm going to insert my crochet hook knitwise through that first stitch, and then pop the crochet hook through the buttonhole itself so that I can get to the fabric on the back, the facing, and then insert the crochet hook through the first stitch on the bottom needle of the back, also knitwise. So I've got my crochet hook through both stitches and then also through the fabric. Now I'm going to pull up my working yarn with the slip knot, snug it up slightly, not too tight. With my working yarn, I'll wrap it around the needle so I have 2 loops, and then pull both of them through the back stitch, through the buttonhole itself, and through the front stitch. Okay. So what we have now is 2 loops on the crochet hook, our slip knot, and a second loop, and they've both been pulled through the first stitches on the bottom needles of both the front band and the back facing. So these first stitches on the front and the back are secure now. They have the working yarn pulled through them, so we can release them from the double pointed needle and then use the tip of that double pointed needle to pass the first loop on the hook over the second loop. And we're back to having 1 loop on the hook, okay? And you can then go to the back, also release that first stitch from the double pointed needle so that there are 3 loops left on the back needle, 3 loops left on the front needle. And then we'll repeat that process for the rest of the stitches on this bottom needle. So insert through the next stitch knitwise, go through the buttonhole to access the back fabric, insert through the next stitch on the back fabric knitwise, take your working yarn, wrap it around, pull a stitch through. You can now, if you like, release that stitch from your DPN, pull through the buttonhole, and then through the stitch on the front. Release it from the DPN, and then use that point of the DPN to pass the first loop over the second. Okay. And then we'll repeat for the next 2 stitches on the needles. So what we have now are 3 bound off stitches on the front, 4 bound off stitches on the front, and the corresponding 4 bound off stitches on the back. And you can see on the back, the bound off stitches don't have that nice loop, they just have a bar. So next we're going to turn our work upside down and continue the same process across the 4 stitches on the remaining needles. Okay, we've turned the piece upside down and we're ready to finish the binding off process on the remaining 2 needles. So we've got a nice bound off edge around all 8 of these stitches. And we just need to close the loop here. So I'm going to cut my working yarn, thread it onto a needle, and insert my needle right here into the very first loop up here, which was my slip knot. Then I'm going to grab that last loop, tighten it until it's the same size as all the other loops, and then move my needle back down to the wrong side of the fabric. So, sorry, there we go. With this contrast color, it's not the prettiest. But you can see how if you were using a smooth yarn in the same color, it would just blend right in. A button will go through there nicely, and we can weave in these ends on the back side. That's what the back side looks like.